Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. A gentleman that I've become acquainted with on social media has been posting quite a lot about the impact of hybrid working, of remote working, of the impact of that on work, on collaboration, on people's lives, on commercial real estate, on downtowns, etc. So, and he's an expert in that area. And so I thought it'd be interesting to check in with him. He's the managing principal of Movida right now. He was a senior principal with Accenture, an executive managing director with Newark Global Corporate Services, and before that, a managing director with CBRE, one of the big real estate firms in the country. And so I want to introduce you to my guest tonight, who is Francis Saele. Is that correct?
That's close enough. Yes, it's Saele, actually.
Saele. I apologize.
That's fine.
Francis Saele, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Brian. Great to be here with you, and nice to meet you here.
So tell me, why do you have this passion for remote work and analyzing it?
Well, my whole professional career has been involved in basically real estate, office and industrial real estate, going way back to when I first got out of college. So I've been involved in several aspects of commercial real estate, or as an owner, as a developer, as a service provider to clients using real estate. And when the pandemic hit and everybody went home and everything still worked, I said, this is going to be the biggest change that has ever occurred in office real estate. And it became kind of a focal point for me. Whatever else I was doing was not anywhere near as interesting. And it's evolved actually over the last 3 years, pretty much as I thought it would, but it's very far from being complete. And there's a lot more to come, both for occupiers and for people involved in owning and managing real estate. So that's why I got involved. And we can talk about any component of that you think would be of interest.
Well, let's just start with some of the posts that you've made. One recent one was that there's going to be 1 billion square feet of empty office space. Do you really believe that?
Well, that's not my prediction. It's a very well known. I've forgotten who that was.
Visual Capitalist was the.
Well, yeah, but the data came from somebody else. Forgive me for not knowing that, but it's a very, very recognized, reliable source in valuation and real estate, and that's their number. It seems high to me, frankly, but it doesn't include the invisible occupancy that exists out there. There's a 200 to 300 million square feet of leased office space that's available for sublease to other tenants. So This is space that is leased currently but available. So if you add that to the billion that isn't occupied or leased, you have a huge problem in North America.
The article said that 5 to 10 office buildings a month could default.
That was the prediction. Yes.
Do you think?
And that's we're seeing it occasionally. We saw some big ones in New York and Los Angeles, a few months ago. But those are people they're pretty smart people, and they're certainly not going out of business. But they figured out that they couldn't make any money on the properties that they had borrowed against, and that most likely they are non-recourse contracts with lenders, and so they basically just handed back the keys and walked away. They figured that would be a less disruptive and less costly solution for them. And unfortunately, today, a large chunk of the properties that are going to be coming up for refinancing are financed similarly, where they're non-recourse, where the only problem for the borrower is that they won't own the real estate anymore. They may still manage it for the owner, but they won't be the owner. And from their perspective, that's not terrible. It's, they lost their equity, but that's it. They didn't lose their house and their boat and everything else they own, which was very common many years ago.
The vacancy rates that you that are in this article that you posted were astounding to me. New York, 75 million square feet, 16% vacant. Washington, D.C., 74 million square feet, 20% vacant. Chicago, 63 million square feet, 23%. And then the height was actually, I was surprised, in Dallas and Houston, where I thought Texas was on fire and they'd gone back to work. 53 and 49 million square feet, 25% and 25.6% vacant. And then the highest was in New Jersey at 25.8% vacant. So these are some staggeringly high vacancy rates.
Yes, for sure. I do have the post here. So I just think, and certainly in a place like Dallas is a high growth area.
Yep.
There will be people coming to Dallas. So there's a lot of growth in Dallas. And I lived there for a few years ago. It's a wonderful place, will continue to grow and prosper. The problem that these markets have is that no one is prepared to make long-term commitments to major office space leases. And it's basically put the market into some state of paralysis. Those organizations that have a deadline coming up for a major space typically aren't renewing for another 10 or 20 years. They may renew for 3 years, and they may negotiate a option out in 18 months or something like that. There's still a lot of indigestion with respect to existing tenants, and that is sort of working its way through the system. That also makes buildings much more difficult to refinance.
Yeah.
You have this conundrum of those two things, plus interest rates going up, making the cost of money, the borrowed money, more expensive. Yet you can't go back and adjust rents. Rents are going the other way. Rents are going down. And to sign up new tenants in those spaces, typically you may maintain the face rate, but you're going to provide concessions in free rent or else otherwise. The effective rates on those leases are going down. So you have this mismatch of properties, which you can't do much about, and the market.
So I want to come back, after a break to some of your other posts on remote work and whether that is a trend, whether it's a positive trend, whether it's going to continue, et cetera. But let's accept for a second that it's here and the vacancy rates are there. The article that we're talking about spoke about a Brookfield default on an interest payment. You have also commented about how interest rates are going up, that the debt is typically non-recourse to the owners, and so therefore, logically, if vacancies are increasing, occupancy is down, rental rates go down, interest rates go up. Some of these owners are just going to give back the keys to the bank and walk away from it, are they not?
That's correct.
And what happens? What happens to sort of the regional banks that are the big financiers of a lot of this commercial real estate?
Well, there's a lot of press about that, and I guess for the major banks, the JP Morgans and Citibank, those are banks that can't fail, sort of by definition from the Federal Reserve in the U.S. But there are many smaller regional banks, which are not small banks, but I mean, they're 100 billion plus. But if you look at the percentage of their loans in real estate, it depends on the bank in terms of who has the greatest exposure. And I'm sure that there have been provisions with those institutions to prevent them from getting into a situation that we saw with some of the banks on the West Coast earlier this year. So I know we're going to see too many more bank defaults, but we may see bank workouts done before they come to that level.
So some people thought that Silicon Valley Bank would have some carry on to other banks and would create a sort of a process that lots of banks went through. It didn't happen. It was 3 banks that ended up having challenges at the time. Charlie Munger from Berkshire Hathaway supposedly has said commercial real estate is the area he's most worried about right now, and banks that are financing commercial real estate. What do you think you don't think it's going to play out with default? Do you think it's going to play out with workouts? Is that correct?
I do. I don't think we're going to see bank defaults. I think the Fed has gone overboard in terms of getting people comfortable with that, even though they may have more than the FDIC limits, which is the limit of a reimbursement for loss, than most people have, that those major depositors are not going to be hurt. And once you say that, I mean, I think the concern about getting your money out of one bank into 100 banks because you don't want to be above the limit goes away. So I think there'll be less movement of funds relying on what is not a written or express commitment to bail out depositors, but an understanding based on what happened that no depositor has taken a loss in the current cycle and likely will not, no matter what happens.
So there won't be a run on the banks.
No, I don't think so.
But there could be some banks that have workout and what, forced mergers with other banks, or what do you see happening?
Well, those are all possible. It really depends on the organization and what their profile is, how they've been doing, how they match up to another bank, and what makes the most sense for the Fed and for the market. So that's what's going to happen. It's with respect to the real estate, I mean, there's not too much we can do about the financial side. That's going to play its way out. However, that's going to happen. But on the real estate side, the real estate's not going away. The buildings aren't going away. They're just staying sort of where they are and becoming more empty over time. The biggest issue being that the demand for real estate, for this kind of office CBD type real estate, has really dwindled.
We're going to come, as I said a minute ago, after the break, we're going to talk about remote work. But you see this trend as being a long-term trend, not just a cyclical one associated with COVID-19 pandemic.
Correct. No question about that, because the genie is kind of out of the bottle here. Workers have found out that they can work remotely and they can work remotely effectively. The only real discrepancy is occupiers and organizations that have major commitments on CBD real estate. They have leases that go out 5-10 years. What do they do with the space? There's no market for subleasing. So from their perspective, they want to use it. They also want to participate in many community organizations and the public sector and the taxing authorities who say, if you let people work away and they aren't working, in the downtown core, that our tax base is going to go up. Or that the supporting retailers, the restaurants and the bars and the other supporting organizations are going to have financial difficulty. I think that's all going to happen. But the real question is, why would those people go back? I mean, they're going back to some extent because of the mandates, which over the last couple of years have been more or less forceful, but still seem to be having about the same impact. I mean, you don't see any major movement back. What you do see is a lot more indigestion between the occupiers who really want to have flexibility and the landlords and owners or the occupiers themselves who just don't want to have this problem.
This is a fascinating issue. We've talked just now about the banking and financial ramifications. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the human impact and whether remote work that Francis says is productive and efficient really is productive, efficient, collaborative, creative, etc. And then we're going to talk about the impact on downtowns. So it's going to be an interesting conversation about the real estate market, the office real estate market, work from home, remote work, etc. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Sagan 860. My guest tonight is Francis Saele. We're talking with him about remote work and the impact on office space and downtown locations. Francis is a workplace and real estate solutions expert, a remote model design and implementation consultant, and a portfolio services outsizing expert. He's got experience with big real estate firms in the past, Accenture, etc., and he now runs his own consulting firm. Francis, you commented about a newsletter, Recruiting Brain Food newsletter, that talked about how this sort of the return to office, return to past, simple one-size-fit-all mandates don't work.
Right.
You also commented just before the break that you think that we've learned that remote work works, that people can be efficient and productive. Some bosses don't agree. They don't know if they can trust people to work all day long, and are they as productive, and are they actually at their computer, and maybe they're taking time off and stuff like that. So what's your assessment? Does remote work actually work, or is it a problem?
Well, I know it actually works. There have been countless studies performed since the few months after the pandemic started, all the way through 2021, basically, which demonstrated with very good data, not just survey data, with real data on the economy, that remote work was more productive, actually.
More productive.
More productive, yes, by far. The biggest jump in productivity over the last 20 years has been that period, that 18-month period, until the end of the 2021. You recall in 2022, the signs started going up. We need to get back to the office. Okay. And although that was delayed a little bit until the end of 2021, basically, it was at that point where productivity began to decline.
Really?
And it has not recovered.
Productivity's gone up. Why? Because people aren't commuting, or they've got less distractions,
well, I think that,
or what?
Yeah, during that period, everybody was basically working from home or a remote location. They could work whenever they wanted to. I think many tried to overperform to show that work could be done effectively remotely. And we had this consensus view that that's how work had to occur during the pandemic.
Yep.
It's when we went back to the opportunity to work. Well, you can go back now because you're not going to get sick and die. That problem started to occur. People like that flexibility. They like the fact that they could work asynchronously with their other colleagues and still get their work done and make sure that it was available for collaboration or whatever. So they didn't want to give that up. On the other side, management in many firms, tends to be, baby boomers primarily,
Yep.
And older people who have traditionally always worked in an office, nothing else. And they just don't see how this is feasible on a long-term basis. And you've seen a lot of articles about what I would call, faux issues that are not real with respect to productivity, the productivity paranoia that you saw coming from Microsoft, where they didn't have any sense that management had no belief that work could be done this way on a long-term basis, and yet the employees were just on the opposite scale on the same question. So I think the studies demonstrate that remote work works. And it also demonstrates that most people like it. There are some segments that shouldn't be in a fully remote situation. And that was in that article today, this morning, where they talked about the only a single version of how hybrid would work. It's really not the right way to do it. If you have new employees coming in, you'll want them to be with other new employees to go through some type of orientation and to get familiar with the organization, the culture, what they're doing. And they recommended that you bifurcate people into various segments. I think we'll see more of that coming forward, rather than saying you be in the office on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for everybody, that this group may do this group may do that, and another group at the team level, not at the senior management level, but at the team level, decide that the way they work together is going to be different for them based on where they live, how they interact, what's a convenient place for them to meet at. Is it the legacy office space, or is it the local Starbucks? So you'll see a lot more diversity of the ways in which remote employees work going forward.
I saw one study that said the increase in productivity was just because people work longer. Do you think that's the case, or is it actually more productivity?
Well, that's a good question. It's hard to know that. And we don't typically time track people all the time. So it may be that they're working longer, and I don't think most organizations have a problem with that. As long as they don't have to get in the car and commute for an hour and a half each way.
Yeah, I found the article and the criticism kind of surprising, that they were saying the only benefit of the increased productivity from work from home was increased time. But if people are willing to increase the amount of time because they're saving the commute time, what's wrong with that?
Nothing really. And plus there are other benefits as well, which are almost equally important. If they have children, there's a major segment of young parents who have children that are, for 10 years or so, maybe a little less than that, need attention on a regular basis. Having the ability to pick them up, drop them off at school, and many of them are going part days. Having the ability to do that is very meaningful to people. So it's more than just having
if they're doing that, then they're not working for us.
Well, that's not necessarily true. It depends on what they're doing. Assuming there's no collaborative activity going on from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And you have the individual has individual knowledge work, we call it, to do. They could do it earlier, they could do it later, they could do it some other time. But if they need to take 45 minutes to go to a school to pick up their son, they can do that.
So Tom Flanagan wrote this famous book about the world is flat and thought that because of global communications and global transportation, we could work from anywhere, which, was sort of 10 or 20 years before the pandemic. And he was suggesting would happen. It didn't happen. And then Richard Florida wrote the book or the article about the world is spiky and said, no, we've got to be combined in agglomerations of people in spiky cities. And he said the world is spiky because we need that interaction, we need that collaboration, we need that for creativity and new ideas and stuff like that. So what's happened to those two ideas? Do we not need to actually get together with people and collaborate for success, or can we collaborate through Zoom, Teams, WebEx, etc.?
Well, I think that's an easy answer to that, because there's no one right solution. You may need both spiky and flat at the same time. And that would really depend on the nature of the work, what's being done, how it's being done. Personally, I've been involved in outsourcing for many years in Asia, and have traveled there and seen people work there and work very efficiently. And they work for about a third of the cost, roughly. Could be more, could be less. But a lot of work can be done overseas for less money, and that is still continuing. And it's also invading areas which has not been historically done. So that's certainly doable. On the other hand, there are types of work where you really want to be closer to your colleagues and to meet in person. And I suspect if you talk to the Microsofts and the Google people, they'll say that's why they really want those people to be together in Mountain View, working, for a substantial amount of their working week together. So it just depends on the nature of the work that's being done. And I think that will drive where work is actually done based on the work and the people and what's required. Does that make sense to you?
Another criticism I heard was that for people established in their jobs and their positions, it's okay to work from home. But younger people that need mentorship, that need training, are really harmed by the work from home, remote work.
I think that is true, and I think there's some stats in the post this morning about that only 5 or 10% of new employees in knowledge firms wanted to work totally remotely. People who are younger, newer in the business, who want to get to know colleagues, want to network and build a group of people that they know and interact with. And I think that's probably best done in an office environment where a lot of people are. On the other hand, the same article talks about people who are older, who are established in their field, who don't necessarily need to have that being introduced to everybody all the time. That they work perhaps more efficiently, and they prefer to be working remotely. So you could make that simple dichotomy between a new worker, a new employee in the business, and someone who's been in it for 5 or 10 years and who is seasoned and well known, and who management trusts.
I was at a real estate, Urban Land Institute actually convention, and the final keynote speaker said, if you're an employer and you're not demanding your employees come in at all, you're going to suffer for lack of creativity and innovation, and you're not going to grow. But if you demand your employees come in 5 days a week, you're going to find that the best employees don't want to work for you anymore, and you're also not going to grow, and you're not going to be creative, and you're not going to be innovative. What do you think of that comment?
I think that's probably true. The best and the brightest are not going to be going into an office and commuting an hour a day, 5 days a week. It just isn't happening. It doesn't exist today, really. Fridays are kind of a nebulous day to a lot of people, no matter what they think they're doing in terms of working. I think you look at companies like Salesforce out in San Francisco. When they initially in the pandemic, they declared they wanted to be fully remote, forever. Now they recently cut back on that a little bit. It pulled back a little bit and want people in the office more. But they did establish a retreat center, which was about an hour from their office in San Francisco, downtown San Francisco, and it was right on a lake or something. Very attractive place, and it became very popular for employees to meet and to collaborate. And increasingly, as we've come out of the pandemic, it's being used more and more. And they're actually building one that's twice as big. So I think there are alternative places where collaboration, culture building, getting together, building that culture can be done outside of the legacy office, which was the only place really that knowledge work has been performed for almost 100 years. I mean, this
So,
is a 100-year thing that's died.
so do we need to rethink legacy offices?
Well, when you say rethink them,
Redesign them?
well, it's not just the design. The office building is located typically in a place in the CBD, which is the best place generally for the entire community for people to commute to someplace that's central. I mean, that's generally the case in CBDs. And the design criteria was we want to be able to have all of our employees together in one place. And that grew over time to the point where many employers had several hundred thousands of people in a building because they wanted everybody in one place. That was the only business model that existed. That's really gone. People are not working that way. They're not working in a single place 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. They're working differently. They will spend time together and collaborate with people, and they will do that in various places. They may do it in the legacy office because that's the only office space left that exists within organizations today. You don't see too many organizations going out and leasing buildings in the suburbs because they want to be closer to their employees because they've already got a huge cost associated with their existing real estate. So they want to use the existing real estate. But over time, my view is you're going to see less in the core, less in the CBD, more supporting office in the remote suburban areas.
But do you think you're going to see them converted to these things like you've described, wellness centers on lakes and things?
Well, are you talking about conversion of the downtown buildings?
Yeah. Will companies close down downtown buildings and open up your wellness centers that you talked about?
Well, I mean, I think there will be some. There's a whole discussion about ghost buildings, and the fact that there are some buildings in many core cities that are just not viable any longer. And as those tenants leave, there probably won't be replacement tenants to do office work. There will be other uses and other things that can be done within those buildings, but that has to be, there's a lot of work that goes into determining what can be done in what kind of building and does it work. I mean, the obvious one that comes up all the time is, well, why don't we convert these to rental apartments, which are sorely needed everywhere?
Yep.
And particularly low income apartments. It's very difficult in some structures to get the basic requirements that you need in an apartment in a building that was designed really for a totally different use. You have too much depth. You can't get enough sunlight. The plumbing is terrible. It's very difficult to put it together.
So you don't think it'll happen?
Well, what specifically?
Office to residential conversion.
Well, I think there will be some of it. And we've seen some good examples of that. There are some really interesting examples, particularly in older buildings that have, smaller dimensions to them in New York and elsewhere. But I mean, I think the general sense of the people involved in doing this, and I'm involved in some of that myself, is that office to residential conversions may be as 5 to 15% of the potential market of properties, but certainly nowhere above 20 or 25. So I think it's a relatively small segment. I mean, there are other uses for vertical buildings. Vertical farming is one that's very popular now, and there's several major investors who are doing this now in Canada and the U.S. And it's the first time out of the box in getting major vertical farms, 2 or 3 floors of a building, and they convert it into a farm. It's amazing to see, but it's a totally different use. Now, whether the economics of that will work will depend on what it costs and what the potential is in that market. I think we'll see more things like that.
The next topic we got to address is what's this going to do to our downtowns? We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with Francis Saele and talk about downtowns, CBDs, central business districts. Do they exist in the future? Stay with us, everyone. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Francis Saele. He's a real estate expert. He's been involved in numerous different functions within the real estate business. He's in Cincinnati. Is that correct?
That's right.
And you're now consulting to people in this area, and you've become a very prolific poster on things to do with remote work. We've talked about the negative impact to banks and to commercial real estate ownership companies as vacancy rates increase to that 20% mark, if not above. We've talked about remote work, and you strongly believe that it's efficient and productive and is a trend to the future. So I got to ask you two questions, I guess. Number one, are the people that are demanding, and you've got JP Morgan, you've got Goldman Sachs, lots of, Microsoft you've mentioned, et cetera, that are demanding people return to work full time. Are they just dinosaurs, or are they missing something? And number two, what's going to happen to our downtowns if you're right? Did they become ghost towns?
Those are both good questions. And by the way, the return to office mandates from places like JP Morgan, I'm not sure about Goldman Sachs, but there are many, and Microsoft and Meta, they are not for 5 days a week in the office. They would like to see people there, in most cases, 3 days. And it's kind of a wink and a nod, I think, to managers as to whether that's a mandate that you must achieve, or whether that can be modified in some way. I suspect there's a lot of special cases at the team management level for individuals that, for various reasons, can't or don't want to work 3 days a week in the office, just because they have those personal things we talked about earlier in their lives. So while there may be mandates, I always ask the question when people talk about mandates, when's the last time you read the article about the guy that got fired because he didn't show up? I haven't seen one. Have you? Right.
No, I think that what happening is people self-select out, right? They take other jobs, and I have seen people that are taking jobs where there's more flexibility if they haven't been granted that flexibility.
Right. Well, that's part of, it's like the natural selection process now of how you work. If you really want to be working on a remote basis primarily, you have to find an employer that wants you to work on that basis. There was some recent data out about the percentages of organizations that were advertising for remote work only. And apparently, I think that's about 10% of the market, maybe. But those ads tend to get 50% of the applications. So
really,
50% of the job applications coming from all over the place, because it's a remote job, are applying to the 10% of employers that want to have remote only employees. I
apologize. Another trend is sort of these digital nomads. My own kids have been, traveling the world and still working, and seemingly to do it effectively. So if this happens, if employees really prefer this kind of remote work, if not, frankly, a work where they get to become a digital nomad and not work from home, but work from wherever they want to go that week, that month, etc. What happens to our downtowns?
Yeah, I know that's the second part of your question, and it is a really interesting question. I don't think there's a clear answer to that. And by the way, I know some digital nomads myself, and I think it takes a special characteristic of the individual and family to do that. Some actually that are families where they become digital nomads. But I think for the most part, I don't know that a large share of people who want to do remote work necessarily want to travel the world. I mean, that's a nice idea for one. But back to the question, on downtowns, I think we'll see a dramatically different makeup of who is downtown and when are they downtown. I think the optimal evolution there would be to get more people living in those areas, because there is a lot of infrastructure already there. And if you could take advantage of it, I think that would be good for a community. So if we have good restaurants there, if we have more people there who are going to be there at night and early in the morning, that's going to mean more business for those supporting businesses. But I think we're still going to have downtowns, and we're still going to have headquarters operations for bigger firms, and those will probably want to be downtown. But you may have a headquarters for Toronto Dominion Bank in Toronto, but for other communities where they have a fair amount of people and offices and office space, there may not be a downtown location necessarily. That's probably a bad example because all banks have operations downtown, but there would be others where you will see headquarters of organizations remaining, but they'll be smaller. It'll be the C-suite. It'll be maybe HR. It'll be perhaps finance. Not all the finance workers, but the leaders in those offices. So they'll be much smaller space commitments. So what you may have in 50,000 or 100,000 square feet may be pulled down to 20,000 square feet. I mean, it's possible. Or you would see the balance of that work distributed, and a good chunk of it would be remote, and you would have spoke, and that would be the spoke, and you would have hub offices. You would have office space, and the office space may be leased on a more traditional basis, or it could be in co-working centers. It could be in flex space, but space that's near where people live, so that you could have commutes to meet up with others who are doing the same work or in the same teams, distributed in the community.
So I'm aware of consulting firms and accounting firms that'll have a downtown office, and then they'll have in the Toronto area, 3 or 4 offices in the suburbs, and hot desks. And so you can work from home, or you can work from an office. And if you want to work from the office, you've got to book your hot desk ahead of time so that you know what desk that you're actually going to. And then they'll have meeting rooms that people will go to if they have to have meetings and they want in-house. And people seem to be fluid, and they work from home, they work from a suburban office, they work from a downtown office, they go to a meeting room. It's like, who knows where their office is? It's everywhere. It's everywhere.
I think that's true. Financial planners are good like that. I have a financial planner. He has 10 offices, so you don't know where he's going to be. But what you want is the guy. You don't care where it is. You want it to be convenient to you. So I think back to the question, I think we'll see that approach, the consulting approach, perhaps. And a lot of consulting firms have been operating that way for a long time. They don't necessarily have a permanent office or a place where, is their primary office, but they have the ability to work in a number of different places.
Yeah.
And they'll decide that based on other factors, who they're meeting, what the meeting's about, what kind of space they want, et cetera.
So many cities have zoning that doesn't allow residential developments within sort of central business districts, and or doesn't allow conversions of office space to residentials. Do all those zoning rules have to change?
Well, I think they have to be looked at. And I think a lot of those would probably benefit. A lot of those cities would benefit from refreshing those rules. I think in New York there's a law that you can't touch buildings that were built before a certain time. You could only do it for later buildings or something like that. I'm not totally clear on the issue, but those kinds of issues, that kind of raw regulation probably hinders the evolution of the space.
Yeah.
I think you really would be communities would be better served by zoning, moving with the trend of the times. And certainly the trend of the times, this is a significant change.
And I would have thought it's the Class B office space that's most at risk, is it not?
Well, I think the lower you go on the totem pole there, the more risk you have. So B, C, maybe some D buildings, I don't know if there's still any D buildings, are really all very much at risk.
What about all the restaurants and the coffee shops and the dry cleaners that are reliant on all the traffic they're going to get? And, while people may be going to the office, as you say, but they're going 3 days a week, Mondays and Fridays are terrible. And what about transit systems that are down to 60 and 80% of traffic because they're not getting the traffic on the Mondays and Fridays? Are CBDs ghost towns on Mondays and Fridays? And do all these dry cleaners close down their businesses?
Well, I think every community evolves as its businesses evolve and its people evolve. I think there's a classic video that's available on YouTube about Bertha Benz, who was the wife of Old Man Benz, who created the motor car. Okay, and how she decided to drive the prototype about 100 kilometers across Germany, and it's a great story. It's about a 7-minute video on YouTube. The day that changed everything, or something like that, with Bertha Benz. If you just Google it or just put it in YouTube, you'll get it. Okay. But you'll see across as she goes, as she stops in a town where the car breaks down, and everybody looks at her like she's a witch, or that why would anybody not have their horse, or how can this make any dent in how we travel? Not recognizing how different the world is going to be in a relatively short period of time. I think that's where we are today in knowledge work. that knowledge work has been done only in office buildings for 100 years. Okay. Those days are not going to continue. It's going to be much, much different. And all of the ancillary infrastructure that's been built up over the years in every downtown, and all of the supporting businesses are going to have to change. You can't keep feeding the beast that doesn't make sense anymore. And that's what I think some would like to have happen. I use the acronym after RTP, RTO, RTP, return to the past. There are people who want to go back to the way it was. That's not going to happen. I think what we have to do is understand what is going to happen in the future and how to prepare ourselves to be best equipped to be productive and to live happy lives there.
That's a fascinating, point of view that we've just got to admit that this return to the past is probably not going to happen. Even though a lot of people do want it, particularly the commercial landlords more than anybody. Let me ask you, what's going to happen to retail malls? With everyone home with COVID, internet shopping went up crazily as well, and I think that retail sales that were done via the internet went from something around 10% to 17% of all retail sales. They may have come back down again to somewhere around 15, but they're not back to 10. That's almost one in every $5 that are spent in retail no longer being spent in stores. What do you think is going to happen to shopping centers? Is it going to be the same thing?
Well, I think there is more interest, I think, in retail shopping centers because they're really well located real estate generally. And there are a lot more adaptive opportunities for conversions of those properties into something different. And it's easier to do from a construction and design perspective. And if the market supports it, particularly in residential or in hotels or that sort of thing, that you can take a center which maybe has been marginal or maybe doesn't need as much retail as it had in the past and convert that into gyms or into pickleball courts. You've seen some of that. Have you ever played pickleball?
I've never played pickleball.
I never have either, but there are thousands of people who want more pickleball courts.
We're gonna have to pick it up.
Yeah, but you can do it, So I think the potential in retail is good. The retail centers are good, but they won't be exclusively retail malls anymore. Those are going to become hybrid buildings where there'll be many different types of things happening. And you may see some residual office going in there because the people who want to be closer to their clients want to have an office space. So you'll see that. I think you'll see more hybrid buildings in the suburbs.
Well, when you're ready to pick it up, pickleball, my cousin is in Cincinnati. He's the top rackets coach in pro in the whole area. He's #1 senior squash pro.
Really?
Does everything in that. So you let me know when you want to pick up pickleball. I'll give you a recommendation. We're going to take a final break, and come back and have some concluding comments on what this all means from Francis Saele. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Francis Saele. He's a real estate expert, a commercial real estate expert, an advisor, consultant, etc. And he's been very thoughtful in a lot of his posts on what's going to happen with commercial real estate, given this remote work from home trend. And you know what? He's calling us out. And he's saying we're just not going to go back to the way it was. And people have got to be thinking about how work is going to be in the future. And this 100 years of all knowledge work being done from offices is over. And we got to realize that. And it's been proven that people can be as efficient, if not more efficient, working from home. So, Francis, I got to ask you, if I was a CEO of a company and I hired you to advise me on what I should do in this situation, what's your advice to me?
Well, I think when that happens, you really have to understand the organization, particularly the leadership, and depending on the size of the organization, you have to get to know key employees as well. So it's management and employees in terms of some have pretty strong prejudices. Others are really struggling with not knowing what to do and are more open-minded to creative solutions. It depends on the culture there and what makes the most sense for the individual organization. And like everything else in this business today, our business, is there's no one solution. There's no one right path forward. But to simply not address it and hope it reverts back to what way it was is not going to happen. So my advice to clients is to invest some time and effort to study what it is that really drives them as a business and what makes their employees more productive, and work around building a structure of workplaces that fit that model, that also gives management the level of control that they want and gives employees the level of flexibility that they need. You got to get the right match, and it's a little different in every organization, if that makes sense.
It does, and I think that I do agree that people that are just hoping and dreaming that it goes back to the way it was in 2019 or 2018, like a lot of things in life, are wrong, and there's just too many people, too many potential employees and current employees that enjoyed the flexibility that they got in the last couple of years, and were more productive, more efficient. And I think we have found that we can collaborate virtually. I don't think that, I had one person that I spoke with that was with a company for something like 9 months and had never met someone in real life. So was hired during the pandemic and worked the whole pandemic, had never met. I don't think that's smart. I think you've got to have some face-to-face interaction. But after you've established a relationship with people and you've got some face-to-face interaction, you can continue a conversation. You can continue to collaborate virtually, particularly if you've saved an hour, if not, in my case, 2 hours a day in commuting.
Right.
Let me change the question. If you're advising a CEO of a big real estate development company like an Oxford or someone like that have got tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of square feet of office, what's your advice?
Well, I think if you are a true office occupier, particularly a CBD type office occupier, and you want to stay there with some component of your operation, maybe not what you had 5 years ago or 3 years ago, but you want to continue to be a fixture in downtown. You want to have your headquarters there, and you want to keep your business in the public light as a good public citizen. I think this is the best opportunity for a tenant in the last 30 years, because of the status of the marketplace as we see it. The demand generally for downtown space is at the lowest it's been ever, I think. And a quality credit tenant can extract a tremendous deal by working with a quality landlord, like those you mentioned. And there are several of those in Toronto.
Final question. What if you're advising a mayor of a major city, given this change? What would you advise him? He's looking at property tax revenue that might go down, restaurants that are going to fail, dry cleaners that are going to fail, transit revenue that's going to go down. What would you advise a mayor?
Well, most mayors of cities like Toronto have community development components within the government. Hopefully, they have been looking at what can be done. I'm sure this is true in Toronto. I just don't know who they are. Have been looking at ways to adapt to the changes that are coming and to make the transition to the future less onerous and more receptive to the population there. I think it's a matter of understanding what the goals are and creating a Toronto 2030 or Toronto 2040 thing. I think you just had one of those up there recently, and it worked out pretty well, I think. But I think the vision is different. So I think you have to look at the revenues and what's going to happen to the tax base, and where am I going to be able to secure the funding for what is going to come in the future, and to balance that all out. It's not an easy task, but I think it has to be done.
Francis Saele, thank you so much. If people want to follow your thinking in this, because I've really enjoyed reading a bunch of your posts and arguments, how can they best do that?
I think it's easiest to reach me on LinkedIn. I'm on there. It's linkedin.com/in/fran.saele or -Saele, excuse me. That's easy. You can also drop me an email if you want. It's fran.saele@mortevita.com. That's MORTEVITA.
Well, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate your thinking. And maybe I could conclude today with a couple of my own thoughts on this. I think that we've got to realize that we're not going to go back. This has been a dramatic change. And I think that COVID-19, work from home really did teach us, as Fran has suggested, that we can be productive, we can be efficient, we can collaborate, we can communicate in a remote setting. Maybe not all the time, but for a lot of the time. And really that this model of spending so much time in a car or in a transit commuting to an office really is a waste of time. It's not productive. And why subject so many knowledge workers, such a percentage of our population, to this complete wasted time, and a whole bunch of emissions, of energy, of cost, etc., just to bring people together that don't need to be together all the time. And so I think that that's number one. I think number two is people that want that all the time control by way of seeing people in their office space are wrong. Most people are very trustworthy, and they'll get the job done. And you can trust them to work and be productive and efficient and work the full time, if not, frankly, more time, because they've saved the commuting time. And I think third, I don't think enough companies or cities are doing what Francis is recommending, which is thinking about the long-term vision. And I think that particularly cities have got to be thinking about this long-term vision. And it probably does mean opening up some zoning regulations, making sure that there's other reasons to come downtown, whether they be for restaurants or cultural events or sporting events or other things, because we do have a need to get together. It doesn't have to be every day, but we do have as a species a need to get together and to commune, to communicate, to collaborate, to bounce off ideas. I went to a concert a couple of weeks ago, and we all have had this experience. When everyone's at a concert and singing together, there's no better feeling in regards to music or dancing together or cheering your favorite sports team together. So there are reasons to get together, but to get together in an office just so that a boss can walk down the aisle and see that you're all at work, we don't need to do that. Anyway, Francis, really appreciate your joining us today and giving us some really interesting outlook on knowledge work of the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Great to be with you.
That's our show for today, everybody. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Cincinnati, at www.saga960am.ca. All of my podcasts and videos are on my website, briancrombie.com. Good night, everybody.